a few points about just a little bit of cheese on the pizza. What's changed from back then to now is that we have quite a lot of economic and econometric techniques by which we can assess whether or not councils are going to be more financially viable or more financially sustainable and save money. And my dear friends, some of my best friends, and I hasten to add some of my best enemies, are economists. They have the skills, I hasten to add that I don't have the skills, to undertake these economic and econometric techniques, and in particular Joseph Drew, who I work with. But over a range across all of Australian local government jurisdictions that we've studied, there is no evidence that you save any money through amalgamation. Okay? It doesn't matter where you do it, doesn't matter how you cut it, it's that simple. We do know that there are diseconomies of scale. Okay, as David was saying, as councils get bigger, it becomes very, very difficult. And basically, the old saying in the country, the reason why I feel I can be bitchy about Dubbo is because I lived for 28 years in Armidale. So I mean, we actually tell jokes about each other. You know, in Tamworth they run a country music festival. In Armidale we have a chamber orchestra and so on and so forth. It's called competitive regionalism, as it were. So we know that that's the case. We know as well, so we don't make any money. There's no economies of scope or scale, most of the time. We know as well from the recent experience in Queensland that the average cost of amalgamation for every individual council in Queensland was $8.1 million. Dr. Drew's done the numbers on that. He's very, very smart pussycat. And we know that there's a massive disruption to community services. And as we say in the council, in country New South Wales, what happens when you amalgamate is that you get a lot more people working inside and a lot fewer people working outside. So the bureaucracies increase intensely. All right? The other point that I would make about it as well is that despite the fact that you can save, that there's this idea that you can save money through procurement, shared services and so on and so forth, we have massive examples of failure of shared services at a state government level with respect to IT. So around about 10 or 12 years ago, everyone in state governments around Australia thought it would be really cool if they packaged all of their individual departments together and got one big computer program to run all of their back-of-house stuff, like payroll and things like that. The Western Australian government managed to lose almost $500 million in 3 years doing that. Right? Now, none of this stuff is on the internet anymore. I happened to be quite a young researcher at the time, and Brian said to me, Professor Dollery said to me, write a paper about shared services. So I did. This was what was going on. Now, it's all disappeared, all right, but it is in an academic article that I wrote called Tortoises and Hares, the Race to Shared Services Amongst Australian State Governments, because that's what happened. The people that were fastest out of the block lost the most money, right? Queensland and Western Australia. They really embraced the idea, okay? They were quite administratively nimble and they failed in this idea. So we have to be very, very careful, not just about amalgamation, but this idea that we have a one-size-fits-all or a particular administrative solution for these kinds of things, all right? It's one of the benefits of having a federal system that we have different jurisdictions that experiment differently with these kinds of concepts. Some will fail, some will be more successful than others. The point is that we learn from it. All right? This idea, this embracing of this administrative ideology is an extremely dangerous thing. So we know that there's big problems just in terms of the economics of amalgamation. I'll come to the politics in a second. To talk about scale and capacity, these are in fact mystical ideas. Right? There are no way that you can quantify them. Now, in one way, that's quite good because it means that you can say, well, we've got great leadership here and so on and so forth. But in another way that can be spun similarly, it can be spun the other way. All right? So it depends who's in power and how they want to spin it. And David's given us an excellent account of how it's being spun. So that's quite an interesting thing. I just want to focus on 3 points about the process which reiterate what David said, but I think I just want to make it a little bit more strongly. The first thing is that rhetorically, what was in the media, that the Minister and the Premier kept repeating again and again is that councils are losing $1 million a day. That was their rhetorical refrain. Right? We've done the numbers on that. Councils are making, in aggregate, around about $1 million a day. They're not losing $1 million a day. Some councils are extraordinarily rich. One thing that we documented in my last book, Funding the Future, Financial Sustainability and Infrastructure Finance in Australian Local Government, full stop, that's the title, was that councils are very bad at using debt. So they're like, as John Comrie says, they're like a 50-year-old man. I'm there in 2 years, right? They like to keep lots of cash on hand, and they service their debt very, very slowly because it makes them feel cool. All right, you've got a lot of cash in the bank, you can do stuff. All right, so they're very, very bad with debt in the sense that they don't use it. People from the right call it lazy balance sheets. Okay, that's what they say, but we just say they're bad with debt. And we know in the United States, local governments take on more debt. Okay, and they can actually do that. It was almost put in the federal constitution that they'd be allowed to do that because they have a moral responsibility to provide the basic infrastructure for their communities, and they have a massive municipal bond market. Okay, so people, instead of buying shares, they buy bonds. Instead of buying Australian government bonds, they buy muni bonds, and they're traded it's a very, very complex market. It's worth about $3 trillion. Okay, as Americans do, they trick stuff up with money, but the municipal bond market is very, very big. And in that book, we argued that in Funding the Future, we argued that we should have a local government infrastructure fund that's run centrally from Canberra. All right, there's a lot of money in the Australian economy. It's not being invested particularly well. Okay, and we can use it for infrastructure, for local government. Okay, it can be government. There's lots of examples of this across the world. Even our friends in Canada do this, in British Columbia, and so on and so forth. I'm getting a bit lost there, but the $1 million a day is wrong. Okay, it's a rhetorical, as a refrain. We've proven it wrong. The second thing about the process is that, and here the rhetoric here is important. We have this idea, not so much by IPARC, but certainly by the government, and certainly in terms of the Independent Local Government Review Panel's final report, that there's an historical inevitability about amalgamation. That we're living in the horse and cart days, and that councils are going to necessarily, amalgamate. As a social scientist, as a political scientist, I've been trained very, very well to never cede, to ever cede agency to history and say that anything is going to be inevitable. Okay? Now, the people that we know that have done that in the past haven't been particularly good people. Right? So we never say that it's inevitable, that anything is historically inevitable. And the fact that these people, these politicians, can actually parrot this, I find particularly disturbing. I'm serious. Particularly disturbing.